Hi everybody, Kathy Syret from Confident Leader Journey here. It's a bit dark in here, but then it is dark outside. I've been reading up a lot this week about imposter syndrome, and I wanted to share with you some of the things I found out about it. And this will be part one. There'll be some further information on imposter syndrome and what impacts it, etc. So, imposter syndrome used to be thought to be disproportionately affecting women. But actually, with better surveying techniques, etc., it has been discovered that both female and male leaders and people who don't identify as any particular gender all experience imposter syndrome to some extent. Now, there are people who don't, and there are people who do. And one of the things we have been able to discover is that there are certain characteristics which can show up in people who experience imposter syndrome. And I'd like to go through 5 of those characteristics now with you and see if you recognise any of them. And of course, each of these characteristics is associated with a possible way forward to handling imposter syndrome. And I'm going to talk about one thing at the end, which is particularly important when it comes to imposter syndrome. So I'll pull it all together then. So let's have a look at the first characteristic. A drive for perfectionism is often correlated with experiencing imposter syndrome. I mean, basically what happens when you're a perfectionist is you set really high expectations and goals for yourself, and when you don't reach it, that's when the self-doubt starts. And it's really thinking about this because part of that expectation is we assume everybody else is doing it perfectly. And everybody else is like us and they're achieving it and we think we're not. So having those really high expectations so you're constantly failing them can actually lead you to when other people say you're good at your job, not believing them, and thus developing imposter syndrome. So a couple of things to look for there. Have you ever been accused of procrastinating because of your perfectionism? Have you ever been accused of micromanaging? Have you ever been accused of not being able to delegate? When you get 99 out of 100, do you focus on the 99 great things you did, or do you focus and obsess about the one thing you missed? Do you feel that you have to be better than other people all the time in order to justify your existence? These are all characteristics of perfectionism. Now, where that comes from, well, it can come from multiple sources, as will any of these characteristics I'm talking about. But I can reassure you that coaching can help you with all of that. So one of the things to think about is where in your life can you start to introduce the good enough policy? You probably already do it in some areas of your life. I mean, we're not all perfectionist about how we tie our shoelaces, or maybe we're not perfectionist about how we bake a cake. So look for those areas where you allow good enough to be good enough and see if you can extend that mindset into other areas of your life. This will really help with the imposter syndrome that you're experiencing. So I'm glancing over to check my notes. Okay. So the second characteristic is someone who, I suppose we basically call this one the super person, superwoman, superman. So the imposter syndrome comes from feeling that everybody else is better than you and therefore you have to work harder to get where you are. And because you work so hard and you work extra hours and you overload yourself with work, whereas everybody else, let's say everybody else seems like that swan on the surface and you're very aware that you're under the water going like this and you're working really hard, you think therefore you are not as qualified to be in that position as these other people who seem to be serenely sailing along and being successful. So this feeling that you're having to be superwoman or superman in order to achieve these goals, whereas other people seem to be achieving them more naturally, can often be something that leads you to imposter syndrome. Of course, the challenge there is we don't see how hard other people are working. We don't see how much effort they're putting in. We don't know what their background and experience is. I once went on a horse course, and before I went, I spent hours working with my lariat. Yes, it was a Western horse course. And I spent hours throwing it out and coiling up, throwing it out and coiling up, throwing it out and coiling up, because I didn't want to waste money on a course to be taught how to do that. So I put in lots and lots of hours. I think I probably coiled it up over 1,000 times, left-handed and right-handed. So I get on this course and I start doing it, and people are going, "Oh, you have a natural talent. You're naturally good at that. I'll never be able to do it." And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I practiced. I've done this 1,000 times." Okay? But they thought I was a superwoman because of it. They thought I had a natural gift. Okay? Whereas I knew I'd worked hard. So we never know how hard somebody else has worked. And sometimes we ascribe natural abilities to them that we have to work really hard at without realizing how much work they've had to do. Now, it's true, there might be some people who are naturally good at things. I'm not naturally a sprinter or a runner. Um, but does that mean I'm an imposter if I run? No, it just means I'm a different type of runner. So one of the ways we can deal with this is actually by looking at our work characteristics. How hard are we working? And thinking, are we actually trying to achieve everything 5 other people do? What actually is our goal? How can we validate ourselves internally instead of by external measures? How can we decide that I've worked hard enough on this? That's good. So that internal validation is the key to the superwoman imposter syndrome. So what's number 3? Number 3 is if you actually grow up being told and possibly believing in the fact that you are a natural talent or genius. So let's say you grow up and you get straight A's at school, you're used to excelling without effort, you were frequently told that you were smart, you were clever, you were good. Do you find that actually when something doesn't work, you actually feel a sensation of shame? Okay. So you will experience imposter syndrome, not because you're setting your bar high and failing it, but because you're not getting things right on the first try, because it's not coming naturally to you. Therefore, you will think that you're an imposter because you've had to try 2 or 3 times because it isn't perfect first go. So because you've been brought up to believe in your natural ability, when it's something you actually have to work at, you will feel that you're an imposter. Interesting, yeah? Now you can see already that these 3 things are all about mindset. The mindset of your expectations, the mindset of how hard you're working versus other people, the mindset of you have to be right first try. All these things are mindset issues. Nothing to do with the reality of what's out there, but to do with how you are perceiving your lived experience. Okay? This will lead us to some things later on. Number 4 is the soloist. Okay? The soloist is someone who has been brought up believing they have to do everything by themselves, and therefore if they have to ask for help or if they need help, they are an imposter. If they can't do it by themselves, they are an imposter. They should be able to do it by themselves. Therefore, if they can't or they need help, they are an imposter. Okay? So be aware that this is another aspect of imposter syndrome. The 5th one is someone who has been led to believe that being an expert is the key. Maybe they've succeeded early in life by being the expert, by knowing the most about something. Could start as a child when you know the most about Star Trek or Star Wars, and you get that kudos from people around you for knowing that and that expertise. You might know most about something at college or university, and then in the workplace you might know more about some technology than someone else. You get used to being seen as the expert. The trouble with being an expert is there is always somebody out there who knows more than you. So the expert mode and mindset is predisposed to imposter syndrome because you only have to find one fact you didn't know or for somebody to ask you a question you can't answer, and your whole identity as expert comes tumbling down. Now, again, this is about having a mindset shift. If you're reliant on knowing everything about a topic for your self-confidence and your self-esteem, you're setting yourself an impossible task. And that's something that all 5 of these roles have in common. The perfectionist, the superwoman, the natural genius, the soloist, and this last one, the expert. One thing you all have in common is those external validation and unrealistic expectations of yourself. Almost setting yourself up for failure. They're all impossible tasks. It's impossible to be perfect. It's impossible to be a superwoman. It's impossible to be a natural genius in everything. It's impossible to do everything alone in today's society, and it's impossible to know everything about something. Even Stephen Hawking said he did not know everything about space and time. Okay? So we're setting ourselves up for failure with our mindsets, which leads me to say that the best solution for imposter syndrome is actually mindset coaching. Now, I did say there's another huge driver for imposter syndrome. And this is something that's called, in the neurodiverse world, it's called masking. It's not just something that happens to neurodiverse people. It's something that happens to anybody who feels a little bit different, maybe an outsider in the group they're in. And what you do is you start masking your natural tendencies and preferences of behavior in order to fit in. And when you're successful in this and you fit in, so you get promoted and you're successful, because you know it's your mask that's been promoted and is successful and not your authentic self, that leads to a huge amount of imposter syndrome. The answer for that is getting in touch with the authentic self through coaching, counseling, and other work so that you can be successful and be authentic at the same time. Interestingly, this is the one piece of feedback that comes from almost every survey about people who are seen as good leaders. The word authenticity is always in the top 5 items that are described. So if you've been masking in order to fit in and be successful, as opposed to just, flexing your behavior here and there, but you've actually been disguising your authentic self, you are going to feel that you're not a good leader, and other people might be perceiving that as well. So I wanted to bring up the masking issue, because although it's quite complex, and we can go more into detail on that in other things, it is a huge driver for imposter syndrome. If you feel I've been pretending to get this far, then when you get that far, you're going to not value it. You're not going to see it as something you've achieved. You're going to feel it's an act or performance you've been doing, and that's going to make you feel you've got imposter syndrome. Now, in all these cases, if you're actually doing the job, you're not an imposter. End of. You're doing it. Doesn't matter how you're doing it. If you're doing the job and you're doing the work, you are not an imposter. You are entitled to that role. But we can talk more about that in another view. So I'd like you to have a think. If you're experiencing imposter syndrome, where do you think it's coming from? Do you think it's coming from perfectionism, the superwoman mode, the natural genius mode, the soloist mode, the expert mode, or do you think it's coming from masking? Let me know in the comments on this video. And if you want to talk more about coaching to address imposter syndrome, just get in touch. It's you can contact me through the Confident Leader Journey Facebook page, the confidentleaderjourney.com webpage, and you can message me, Kathy Syret, on Facebook, or you can email me, kathy@kathysyret.com. But imposter syndrome is a big issue, gets in the way of a lot of people's happiness and well-being at work. So let's knock this one on the head and explore it and solve it together. This is Kathy Syret from the Confident Leader Journey. Have a good time.